aging is inevitable. It is a process. It's like a moving train.
Yeah.
So you can do something to halt the moving train, but realize you have to put a little bit of an effort. Take muscle mass, for example, right? We will lose, after a certain age, 3 to 5% of our muscle mass every year if we don't do anything about it. So we have to then.
Hey, so excited to have Suan on the show, and Shiyan, we're here to co-interview again.
Can't wait.
It's interesting because this came about because, you're a leader in longevity, you're a founder, and also, we're all mutual friends. So we thought this would just be a nice way to hear your story. So could you introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. I'm Suan. I am the CEO, co-founder, and medical director of NOVI Health. We're essentially a health preventive care clinic, but also a Healthspan platform that was founded in 2019. So we're about 6 years old now. We started initially with chronic disease management and then extended that into at-risk groups, of which weight care became a runaway growth product line for us. And more recently, longevity in the past 1.5 years. To be honest, Jeremy, I think in the last 3 years, we were a bit allergic to the term longevity because there's just so much noise and snake oil that we were a little bit concerned to be associated with that. But about 1.5 years ago, I think we just decided that we have to embrace it and do our part to hopefully contribute to understanding and knowledge and empower people to make informed decisions. And at the end of the day, it's truly about taking charge of your health earlier, hopefully before diseases develop, and changing the trajectories for health and disease to extend the number of years that you live in good health and good function, and not just living longer, but living better for longer.
So I'll start off the first question, and then Shiyan will tag team with me. So why did you decide to become a doctor in the first place? Was it like something that you were like, hey, I want to do that? Or how does that? No.
I think I've always been interested in people and curious about the world. And I think even as a kid, I always wanted to do something that just made a difference. And initially, I actually wanted to do law. And my mom said, you hate memorizing things. I don't think you want to study law. So I ended up doing medicine, but learned that obviously in medical school, there's tons of stuff that you really do have to memorize as well and get strong foundations in. But I think the fun part starts after that, when you get to apply that knowledge base. And every human being is so unique, and an understanding of the foundational biology is just the start, right? So I then fell in love with that whole system that we get to look at and optimize. And there are then some components of that system that sometimes you can't always objectively see through a number, but you get to learn through interacting, hearing, listening, observing. And it's incredibly rewarding when you see the results. So I guess what law and medicine then have in common is that you apply foundational knowledge to hopefully making an impact that actually lasts. And I think that's what I find really rewarding.
Amazing.
Well, the logical follow-on, though, is you became a doctor who actually wound up running a ton of things within the government healthcare and policy system, and then you decided to become a founder.
Yeah.
So how did you, maybe walk us through a little bit that part of the journey? How did you decide, hey,
Mm.
I've seen things on the inside, but I actually need to go start something from scratch myself?
Yeah.
I never thought I would, to be honest. And certainly it was never planned. I think for me, though, it has always just been, when I see a problem, I want to try to contribute to solving a problem, and not being able to unsee things that you see, this drive to figure out how to solve it. And I realized that even in some of the best academic health systems in the world, whilst we have the privilege of the best tools, resources, talent, and a lot of good things are happening, but there were still remaining gaps. And whilst I was at the National University Hospital and the National University Health System, I was already in a very privileged position where I got to see patients. I was doing research. I had very well-funded research programs and had the ability to work with some of the best talents. And then when I started going into healthcare administration, it was partly because I realized when I was seeing patients, whether in clinic or in the hospital, despite the best talent, the best knowledge, there was still a lot of gaps that were maybe not so sexy, but related to healthcare financing, social determinants of health. That still meant that even with the best knowledge, there was still a big gap in what the patient could actually access and implement to make a difference in a sustainable way. And it was also an era where there was a lot of new tools. For example, continuous glucose monitors were coming into the picture. I'm an endocrinologist, so I specialize in metabolism and hormones, and diabetes was one of the most common conditions that I might see in clinic. And I realized, for example, using diabetes as a disease, we would spend a lot of time in that consultation, that precious few minutes that we had to see a patient, gathering a lot of data. What did you eat? Your blood test results show the sugar level's gone high. Have you been eating more this? Have you been moving? And then you've not wasted, but it's essential, but you already spent so many minutes just gathering data. And then there's issues with recall bias, so many things that lead to inaccurate data sources potentially. And then we have to create an output, a plan based on an assessment of these data points. And with now tools like CGM, the continuous glucose monitors, you can watch a movie of someone's glucose and correlate it with these patterns, which is incredibly powerful. And I started giving out my phone number sometimes to patients to WhatsApp me. Send me screenshots of what you were eating, and let's look at the patterns. And my husband threatened to disown me one day because I was constantly looking at these patterns and responding. And this was, of course, not scalable, right? So this is just one small example of the many things that potentially with the right tools and the right platforms could actually be a lot more scalable, could actually bring to bear helpful advice and tips for patients much early on before the need to show up in a clinic or hospital. That could also reduce dependency on medications. But unfortunately, some of these tools and platforms just didn't exist. We did try also to build that in part in the public healthcare system. And there are still continued efforts and I think developments since then. I guess it's just I'm a rather impatient person. So I like to see results and impact that are deeper, faster. So it's not a criticism of the system. I guess a very senior healthcare leader once said to me at the end of a presentation when we had a huge meeting at the Ministry of Health, and my presentation was about patient-centered care models. And he said to me when we were walking out, you started your presentation with being patient-centered. And when asked, well, that's a great model and there's been some good results, why hasn't it moved faster? Who's not playing ball? And my response was, I know everyone I've worked with is so passionate, works super hard, and I can't say anyone's not playing ball. But perhaps in a big system like a big tanker ship, necessarily we move a lot slower. And I'm a lot more impatient. And he said to me, you started your presentation with being patient-centered and you ended your presentation with impatient. And I think it sums up perhaps why I decided maybe we try this as a little speedboat. And that's high risk, but we could potentially move a lot faster and in some ways still stay connected to the tanker ship. And we're moving hopefully towards the same direction, which we are. I think we're progressing. And so today we still work very closely, even though we're fully private. We work very closely with a number of public-private people partnerships to advance this mission.
Yeah. I empathize about the data side and the patients and impatience component because I still remember over like 20 plus years ago, I was joining these biohacker groups. Back then, we had these pedometers to measure steps.
Yep.
And it was a very weird behavior back then for us at these wristbands to measure steps. And now it seems to become normalized. where everybody seems to have, you know, a smartwatch and, you know, they're aware of
Yeah.
the government is now giving out
Yes.
free, you know, count your steps and try to walk 10,000 steps a day. So I think it's interesting to see where a biohacker where you have like impatient and weirdo suddenly becomes, you know, mainstream and
Can get NTUC voucher.
yeah, that's right.
That's the most mainstream thing you can do.
I wouldn't say that I'm one of those people when I realized the government is
Hey,
giving
if it
me
works, great. Yeah.
points, which became soy drinks for stepping more. I was actually quite encouraged that
Yeah.
it went data away to that. So it's a fair point. Yes. So not just government policy, but government encouraged, right? So I think it's interesting to see that arc over 20 years. And but I also feel like today a lot of people are quite impatient today about longevity, right? I think there's a lot of conversations to be had about you know, just give an example, drugs,
Peptides, man.
peptides,
Yep.
stem cells. I mean, there's so much like, you know, I feel like
Ice baths.
ice baths and sauna,
Hyperbaric chambers.
hyperbaric, and there's so much like interest, it feels like. And but I'm also not sure what the right speed or how to
Sure.
think about it.
Yeah.
How do you think about it? Yeah.
So I guess the first bar is safety,
Right.
right? So we look at what it is, and different things. So for example, stem cell as opposed to a cold bath or ice plunge or a cold plunge, probably very different potential risk levels,
course.
right? So you look at safety, what's the potential risk, and then what's your goal, and what are then the benefits, and you're making decisions based on risk-benefit ratios. As a clinician looking after real people, I'd say our job is to help people understand this risk-benefit ratio and make informed decisions. If something is clearly unsafe, risky, with no known benefits, I have to tell you, please don't do it. If something is clearly beneficial, risk not zero, but relatively small, I can support it. Whereas if it's somewhere in between and it's not clear, as long as you understand and you are comfortable with certain benefit risk ratio, we can support that and also advise what sort of monitoring might be sensible to help you continuously track this risk benefit ratio and make sure that it consistently meets the goals.
But I think, I mean, I don't know. My perspective on longevity is that most people want quick fixes,
Yeah.
and that the 80-20 of longevity is actually a bunch of stuff that does not cost a lot of money, but
True.
actually requires effort to do, which is like, are you getting all the steps every day? Are you getting enough sleep? Is your nutrition adequately balanced? Blah, blah, blah.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
So, like, I mean, I used to work in personal finance, right? And I think personal finance has a similar quality to healthcare, which is like, most people know, they're like, oh, make more money, spend less money. Like, it's not a hard personal finance. Like, you can make it as complicated as you want, but at the very basic level, there's like a few things. But the problem in personal finance, like healthcare, is the benefit of doing all these actions today, you don't really feel it. You need the compounding to take effect, but then the effect happens like 3 decades, right? That's when you're like, oh, I have enough retirement savings because I've been saving since I was 20 or whatever it is. But like when you're 20, you're like, hey, like, should I go out, have fun with my friends now, or should I put that $100 away or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel like for longevity, often, like, if you don't get the 80-20 part right first, like, why are we even talking about the hyperbaric chamber?
Yep. No, you're absolutely correct.
But
you're absolutely correct.
that's probably not good for the for-profit longevity market.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. I would probably add a few nuances, right? I guess the job of a good care provider, right, a longevity doctor, if you like, is then to break it down and actually, let's use perhaps an ice bath or cold plunge, for example, right? What are some of the immediate gratification things that you could potentially get? Help you be aware of that and register that if it's something that actually is good for you. So for example, some of the benefits is muscle recovery. That's quite proven for people who are, high performance athletes. It can support better muscle recovery.
I'm an ice bath fan.
Yeah.
I'm not.
You?
I'm not knocking the ice bath. I just think it's like amusing when
No.
people get so
No,
Like,
agree. But I just use that example maybe
Yeah,
because I kind of knew you were a fan, so you might relate to that example, right? But the other possible benefit that's immediate is the dopamine hit. It's well known that you go in and you get noradrenaline and dopamine, and that's almost immediate. You walk out, you feel a bit of a rush, right? That's why you feel good right after.
Look at the
Now,
Norwegians, man.
sure, right? Now then, okay, that maybe is okay for you. Who shouldn't think about an ice bottle should be a lot more careful. So, for example, people who are known to have issues with their vascular health because it can cause constriction of the blood vessels. And if your circulatory system is not healthy or optimal, it can lead, that vasoconstriction can be dangerous, right? You can have impaired blood flow to your limbs, especially. If you have uncontrolled high blood pressure, these sudden surges in some of these hormones can be dangerous. Your blood pressure could shoot up. If you have certain abnormal heart rhythms, that could be triggered by some of these things as well. So you do need to understand benefit versus risk and be supported to register this as you go through it in the short term.
Yeah.
And then guide it as to, well, if you keep this up consistently, what are some of the more medium and long-term benefits that you expect to see? And then that's what I meant by the tracking. Do you see it or not? But you are also correct, Xian, that the very non-sexy things include moving right, eating right, sleeping enough. These are very not sexy.
Yeah. And so hard.
So hard, but the effects are real and compound. And so using that myself as an example, sleep is my weakest habit. And perhaps until I started tracking it and I see a sleep and a readiness score and I'm getting that feedback, I perhaps brushed it over. I said, I think I feel fine. What's the big deal? I know the signs, but I think I'm okay today. And the younger you are, the more resilient you are sometimes, the more you don't appreciate some of these signals. As you age, you might find that it's harder and harder, right? Like, as a young doctor, sometimes we did overnight calls, we wouldn't sleep, and we would still feel fine. I think if I tried to do that now, I probably wouldn't function at the same way, even if I tried. And it's not that I don't want to. But when I start seeing that feedback reflected, I would adjust my behaviors. It would nudge me to shift my behaviors a little bit. And I think the job of a good healthcare provider who understands your goals is to help you understand what metrics matter when, help you see and be motivated by small things that are truly making a difference. And that's very motivating to keep doing it because it's hard, like you said, to be consistent. But when you see the difference, feel the difference, you're much more motivated to keep it up more consistently.
I'm always feel like in two minds about aging and longevity. I think for me is that on one end, I definitely feel like I'm not in my 20s anymore, right? And I feel like
Really? I couldn't tell, Jeremy.
Facts.
Facts. But, I feel like I'm the steward of a decaying machine.
Oh.
It's like, now I can't run. I have to stretch beforehand, otherwise get injured. Recently I sprained my foot because I was just walking. I wasn't doing anything cool. I was just going to a restroom and I made a turn and I sprained my foot.
I heard you're training for high rocks.
I know. And in training for the high rocks, I also had to be very much more careful compared to how I would have trained in the past.
Sure.
Because I had to make sure that I had my proper form. I think I just feel the same training as I did in my 20s, right? And so I feel like there's a bit of demoralizing effect. I feel like trying to push for health. I mean, it feels like, the difference for personal finance is I feel like it just compounds. But to me, I feel like aging, you're almost like, I don't know, you're fighting against a losing battle.
Right.
Dynamic,
Right.
So I feel like
Right.
I feel that angle of it. And of course, the other angle that I like, of course, is the biohacking, the promise of science and miracles. That sounds very
Gear and control.
Yeah. So I think that's there. I'm kind of like feeling a little bit of that dissonance.
Sure. Well, aging is inevitable. It is a process, right?
Ooh.
But it's like a moving train,
Yeah.
right? So you can do something to halt the moving train, but realize you have to put a little bit of an effort. Take muscle mass, for example, right? We will lose, after a certain age, 35, 40, 3 to 5% of our muscle mass every year if we don't do anything about it. So we have to then work 3 to 5% harder every year just to keep what we have,
Yeah.
right? And
You're just making
plus,
him more depressed.
no, but I mean, I
Already
think
headphones.
it's a mindset. It's a mindset,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because it's something then that you can act on, and it's within somewhat your control. And it's also a virtuous cycle. Once you start getting in gear, it's hard to start. Once you start getting in gear and you find meaningful metrics and you can get dopamine hits and you stay on this virtuous cycle, it gets easier. But also, I think, be kind to yourself. Know that there will be good days, good seasons, bad seasons, and it's not a straight line all the time. I mean, I think even in finance, right? When you invest, you don't hopefully look at
Yeah,
hour to
markets
hour.
are-
Correct. You're not looking at hour to hour fluctuations or even day to day fluctuations sometimes. And then you got to know yourself, even as an investor. What's your investing style? Are you a short term flip? Are you a long term investor? Like, what's your style? Then know yourself. What's your goal? And I think that's, for me as a doctor, understanding our patients and clients' individuals' goals and tailoring it accordingly and helping them realize this and gain the most ROI, their return on investment, not literally just on money, but time and effort, is what I find really rewarding.
The other angle I would give you, Jeremy, is that I also feel like part of what we do is also to set a good example for our kids so that they can have good habits around exercise and nutrition and
Yeah.
sleep. Yeah, because then they don't have to fight the losing battle in their
Hopefully.
20s and 30s because they
Hopefully.
already have a good baseline
Hopefully.
habit.
Hopefully. And you bring up a very good point, Chan, in that as humans, sometimes our psychology is such that we might not do something for ourselves, but we are maybe more likely to do something if we think it also benefits somebody else. So moms in pregnancy, for example, right? So for example, diabetes in pregnancy, I can come back to that because I managed that a lot. Sometimes when you're not pregnant, they are less likely to, if they need medications, take the medication or eat more optimally. But when they're pregnant, they're really motivated because it's not for themselves, it's for their unborn baby and unborn child. And they're super motivated to do something and sometimes end up being a lot healthier coming out of it than before they went into it. So I think our job is also to find that motivator in each person and use that as a lever positively towards achieving their health longevity goals.
So, let's use an example would be, just earlier this week, I watched a YouTube video and this Japanese Singaporean YouTuber compared McSpicy in Singapore and Japan. And
Okay.
he said the McSpicy in Singapore was superior.
Ooh.
And that inspired me or triggered me
Okay.
to say, I'm going to order McSpicy. And as his recommendation, I added garlic chili sauce to the McSpicy. And I had it. And part of it, of course, is I also, as a kid, received McDonald's as a treat. Those birthday
Yeah.
parties
Yeah.
when you're a kid, right?
Yeah.
But now I ate it. It was delicious. And I felt guilty after that, right? Because, your longevity, your health and everything. I'm just kind of curious because I feel like a lot of people are in that boat, right? Like, whether it's like eating char kway teow at the hawker
Sure.
sector, like,
Sure.
over lunch,
Sure.
going for drinks
Yeah.
with their colleagues after
Yeah.
night. Like, how should
Yeah.
people treat those, lapses or those incidents?
Well, I think my philosophy is that, first of all, I like to move away from a cannot restrictive mindset to the goal is achieving balance, right? And then with that, also I come back to be kind to yourself and understand what's going on with your system. It may be in some people that there is a hormonal imbalance that triggers signaling and cravings and a drive. And that means that it will require much more effort to overcome this imbalancing signaling. And some people do and can, but some, if the gap is too big, it's just really, really difficult. And that's in part why some hormone-based medications, like the whole GLP-1 class of medications, can have a role, and it has really, I guess, there's a whole separate topic altogether, but really, come into the forefront a lot more. But that alone, like correcting imbalances biologically without understanding the root behavioral tweaks that can be made, will not be a long-term solution. The behavioral and lifestyle choices are still foundational. So in that situation, I'd say, good job, Jeremy. McChicken is far worse than your McSpicy because at least McSpicy, from what I can tell, you can still gather that it's real chicken meat when you eat it,
Is that
as opposed to a patty.
I definitely eat the unhealthy version of
You mean you can't even see real chicken in there?
I don't know what it is. It's delicious. I don't know. Like, it was a double McSpicy. I admit it was a double McSpicy. And I
Just take
So-
the compliment.
So
She
I'm
was
not
gonna compliment
endorsing
you.
anything, right?
Just trying to compliment
No,
me.
I was just trying to put things in perspective for you, that perhaps even just making a healthier relative choice is the first step,
Right.
right? It's a start. Like, it's not, no, I cannot have, but I will choose a healthier swap for it, right? So something that's in a patty, like I believe my chicken, I'm sorry, I do eat McDonald's from time to time, but maybe not often enough to keep up with the trends of what they've changed,
It's
right?
like you eat salads all the time.
No, I do not. I do
You do
not.
yoga,
I do not.
Pilates.
I do not. I'm
Everything
human
is pure
too.
filtered.
Well, okay, but let me try a different one. So
Yeah.
I feel like when I first had kids, I was very like my daughter didn't eat well, so I was always like really worried she wasn't eating enough food, right? And then the doctor said something which like helped me. She was like, "Hey, don't think about eating within just like one meal or one day. Think about what your kid eats over a week,
Yeah.
and does it all balance out?"
Yeah.
So I feel like sometimes like when
That's
I
right.
have like I really want to have an ice cream or something, I'm like,
That's right.
why don't I eat ice cream every day, right? Like in the course of a week, you know, I would say like 90% of the time I'm like pretty good about what I eat, and then maybe once in a while I will like have dessert or like go out for drinks or whatever it is, right? And so it's like I don't know, like that is kind of versus like you beat yourself up, then it's
Yes.
just you're just kind of like, well, I already
You
ate
gotta
the
have
chicken.
quality of life,
I
right,
might as well.
I'd say then, I think the point I was trying to make with the McSpicy versus Mac whatever else that's not real chicken is eat
Reconstituted
real
cardboard.
food. I think that's principle number one. So for example, maybe sliced fish soup is better than fishball soup, because in fish balls it's largely flour, very little fish. Then the salt and perhaps other flavorings and things like that, they're not real. So similarly, like maybe in a chicken patty in a burger, you don't know what part of the chicken, how much chicken actually goes in there. At least if you are, the last time I ate a McSpicy, I think it was real chicken. I mean, yes, it's coated in some batter, but it's still, you can still see and taste real chicken fibers in there. So
nuggets are no,
not so great.
not so great.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, so like, for breakfast, I could sometimes still have a McDonald's egg McMuffin. But maybe sometimes I might not have both slices of the bread. Just one with the egg and black coffee. It's coffee. It's not off limits. Yeah.
Future episode of us is we're gonna be McDonald's.
Oh, no.
And we'll do like a what's it called? A safety risk reward curve for you. It's like delicious. It's like McSpicy. Is it worth the
Right, what's the ROI?
ROI?
ROI. We have a brave score.
Brave score with NOVI Health, right? So calculating.
So, but I think maybe on the diet piece, right? Like, I think something that's like unique to kind of Asian diabetes is that like it presents differently from Western diabetes,
It
right? So
can.
like I feel like a lot of people are like, oh well, he's thin,
Yeah.
he must be healthy, but
Mhm.
actually that could be masking,
Yes.
a diabetic situation or pre-diabetes or all these sorts of things.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so is there something about the Asian diet that predisposes us to
That's a great
diabetes, or is it more genetic? Like what's
Mm.
because I think the diabetes rate in Singapore is actually quite high.
Yes. And in part that's why Singapore is actually the only country in the world that has launched a war on diabetes in 2016. Which is very commendable. Yeah, you know that?
War diabetes.
War on diabetes. There are a few
We've got war
countries.
terrorism and we have war
Yes.
diabetes.
Yes. I would say,
The enemy within.
And then with the boba shops are opening up
Yeah.
everywhere.
That's right. The boba shops everywhere.
So when you see a boba shop, what do you think?
What do I think about the boba of the shop? Are you trying to get me into trouble here?
No, I'm just wondering, but it's
I think if I go into a boba shop, maybe I'll look for like drinks that I don't know. Again, like look for real food.
0% sugar, green tea.
Like
Yeah,
water.
like milk or
Okay, wait, I see it.
yeah.
So yeah, war on diabetes,
Yeah.
Asian diabetes, Singapore war on diabetes.
It's a well-known phenomenon, if you like, or phenotype, we call it. I've spoken about this before. TOFI, TOFI, thin outside, fat inside, right? From a biological perspective, we know that Asians tend to develop complications of having excess fat. We say adiposity. So specifically, especially visceral fat, we tend to have more of that at lower BMI thresholds. So as a result, on the outside, we may not look obese or overweight or that big, but we hide them really, really well, particularly around our waistline and visceral fat. And this type of fat tends to be more pro-inflammatory and we think contributes to a lot more disease risk and development of diseases such as heart disease, vascular diseases, kidney disease, eye disease, and so on. Okay. Now, diabetes occurs when your sugar levels are so high that it crosses certain thresholds that many decades ago, experts around the room looked at the data and said, above this threshold, we see a very high uptick in how common it is to get these diseases. And so this threshold is not good. Okay, and that's what thresholds we call diabetes. Okay, and then they've looked at the data, at least in some populations, and said, oh, above this other threshold, lower, it's still not good. It's still not out of the woods. It's higher, maybe not as high as the diabetes threshold, and they've called that pre-diabetes, where it's not so high that we call it diabetes, but it's not completely normal. Now, in Asian populations, we tend to develop diabetes, as you said, even though in theory, we think the drivers of that progression from normal to pre-diabetes to diabetes is because we have insulin resistance. After we eat, all of us will experience glucose spiking in our bloodstream as the food is broken down and released as sugar. It ideally is to support muscle. So if we move, it gets driven to muscle to support our movement, cellular growth, development, etc. But if we don't move and we sit still or we take a nap, it then says, oh, muscle, you don't need it. Let me store it away as fat. And we also think that perhaps there's a predisposition for the Asian population to tend to store it away as visceral fat. Okay. Secondly, to your question about diet, one of the hypotheses is that because we tend to have a lot of rice, noodles, a lot of diets that are very high carb, relatively speaking, then every time we get a surge, because even though they don't taste sweet, they will get broken down and released as sugars. And every time we get a surge, we have an organ called the pancreas that makes insulin. So that's the factory, if you like, that makes insulin. Insulin is like the key that opens the lock at the level of muscle to let the sugar in. As we put on weight, we tend to have tighter and tighter doors at the level of muscle and need more keys to open the doors. That's what we mean by insulin resistance. You're still making insulin, but your doors not enough, and there's more resistance. And so the factory will then try to ramp up the production and make more and more and more. That's how you keep your glucose levels normal. But up to a point, the factory's like, I'm done. I can't keep up anymore. And that's when your glucose levels start to rise to higher thresholds and diabetes ensues, right? Now, if we keep exposing our factory to these stresses, the thinking is perhaps that can accelerate that depletion as well. And that's in part why we may see a more rapid progression from normal to prediabetes to diabetes and its associated complications, even though our doors may not seem as tight. Okay, meaning that we may not have as much obesity. So it's multifactorial. I think the rapidity by which urbanization has occurred in Asian populations is probably also a contributing factor, such that across generations, this has happened so quickly that evolutionarily, we've not had time to adapt. Meaning to say, just maybe 3 generations ago, our forefathers were in daily routines that were a lot more physical. There was no public transportation. We had to walk. We had to do things. The jobs that we hold are probably a lot more
We're going
manual.
back to that now, right? With
Right.
AI. All the desk jobs will go away, and the only jobs left will be physical.
So you're gonna say the solution to our insulin resistance epidemic is back to manual labor.
Well, I mean, you're just thinking about it, right? Like, which jobs are going to be really AI resistant? I think, like, surgery.
Uh-huh.
I think, like, anything that requires, like, physical judgment and touch.
Right.
I think those things are the last thing to be automated. You're a plumber, you're an electrician, you're aircon service guy.
Or maybe with more AI and more, grab food, and everybody's going to be like Wall-E
Oh no.
from the show.
Where you're
Wall-E.
like in that chair.
In the end of a movie, if you haven't watched Wall-E by now, but spoiler alert, humans are really fat people who are in hover chairs because they don't move.
They're incapable of
moving.
That's sad.
And food is delivered to them, etc.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's happening in the past, but what do you think the future is? Is it like more obesity, more GLP-1s? I mean, how do you see that? More AI?
Well, I hope if we play our cards right, we wouldn't be that Wall-E world that you described, because I think that would be really sad, right? One of the things I've really appreciated about being in Singapore is the fact that I guess we're a relatively small country, but when we are looking to try to achieve something, I think the whole of society tends to be able to rally towards that. So war on diabetes is one example. Did it really increase awareness? And which other, I think, national leader? I mean, that year, the Prime Minister talked about war on diabetes and rice and whereas in his National Day rally, right? I think we then saw patients coming in also asking the right questions, being more aware. Behavioral change is hard. Moving the needle is hard across the population. But I think if we can succeed in increasing awareness, increasing understanding, and then little nudges, right? Even in how we're designing, even with public transport, the fact that there are steps to take. And these little things over time, when nudged, become more of a way of life. And I think that's the beauty of what can be achieved if people actually are a lot more thoughtful about how systems are designed and do it right and then take small steps each day towards that. I think you brought up examples even in schools. I think that's a key thing to do also in increasing awareness in schools. And the kids that grow up hopefully will be on a different trajectory. And in the meantime, hopefully they influence the adults who maybe started off on a different trajectory, but we're not done yet. And sometimes they come back from school and influence us with some of these messages.
Should bubble tea be taxed higher?
I think
because they made all these efforts, right, to make the Milo less sweet.
Right.
Like there's all these things that are very Singapore specific. But like I think some things people have floated is like, the same way you have a tobacco tax or an alcohol tax, should you have a sugar tax?
If I were to say, I mean, in my mind, again, as a framework, right? Things that are prohibitive, like laws, like don't do this, don't do that. I think, of course, they can work, particularly in the short term. But we have seen examples where down the road, you see a rebound thereafter. Because people will find potentially ways to work around it. So if you want a very quick short-term result, you ban something, you legislate it, I think you can, because you control it, you can get a KPI maybe, right, within a relatively short time. But then is that going to last and be meaningful? I think there can be huge limitations on that if you don't work on that next layer, right? So I guess top layer would be enforce. I would say the next layer would be perhaps to empower in whatever way you can with nudges. That's a little bit tougher, but possible. But through like design thinking, I think even Singapore, like making healthy options on lower shelves in supermarkets and less healthy ones higher up, little nudges like that just make it a bit easier for you to choose something that's better for yourself would be the next layer. The toughest layer, I think, is at the bottom because it takes a lot longer, is really to educate and then put the decision back in the minds and actions of the individual or whoever it is responsible for doing it. That's a much tougher thing to do. But when I think the individual or the stakeholder chooses it because they understand something and they want to do it, that generally produces the deepest, most lasting results, which is why I'm very hopeful about what we hopefully can do in schools, etc., towards that educate bottom portion. That will pay off, take longer time to see it. In the meantime, I think if there are certain causes that we think are so important, short-term strategy, maybe enforce. I would say the bubble tea tax thing is probably one layer below that. Short-term, maybe, but I don't think in the longer term, if people don't understand why or want to, they'll work around it anyway.
I'm curious about, GLP-1s that you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
Because when you read the news about the US, they have a world-leading obesity rate, and then I think one of the fastest adoption rates of GLP-1s as a technology, as a medication. I don't really see that, in Asia, or at least I don't.
You mean the
see
adoption of GLP?
adoption? I'm not sure. I mean, I guess I'm not reading any news about it, but I'm
Right.
kind of curious. Like, is there similar adoption rates? What's the future of GLP-1s in Asia?
Oh, actually, adoption rate is quite high. Yeah, and it has been growing very rapidly. I guess I wonder whether one of the reasons you have that impression is healthcare communications is a lot more regulated in Singapore.
Right.
And I suppose in some parts of Asia as well. I'm sure like Japan, China, yeah. But
Yeah.
I mean, in the US, like advertising, what's possible and not is quite different. So perhaps because of that,
I was gonna say
you
that.
see a lot more coverage coming out of the US. But actually it is happening here. It's just that maybe it's not as out there communicated or in different channels.
Right. That makes sense.
One of my friends made the proposal. She said everyone over 65 should be on a GLP-1. This is in the context of the US.
Okay.
No, it's
okay.
Singapore.
And
Yes.
I'm curious what you think about. I mean, obviously she meant it to be provocative, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
she's like, look at all the research that's coming out. So if you
Right.
don't just look at the weight loss stuff, but you look at the, the benefits to, cardiovascular, protective, anti-inflammatory, blah blah blah. Like you can probably cut down a lot of these things for the over 65 population for not that much money.
Right.
What do you think of that?
As an endocrinologist, it's all about hormonal balance. If you have a deficiency in the hormone GLP-1, then the benefit risk ratio will likely make sense for you, right? If you do not, it could be dangerous. So particularly in older adults over 65, they would be at higher risk for muscle mass loss, progressing, as well as already perhaps have an element of sarcopenia, which is not enough muscle to begin with. So I think one has to be even more careful in older adults in evaluating that risk-benefit ratio. And as a sweeping statement, I would disagree with that. But in the right people, over 65, or any age for that matter, I suppose, it can be tremendously beneficial if it's used right. Using it right includes if you do have a deficiency in this hormone and you go on GLP-1, so you're essentially replacing that hormone, which helps. It makes it easier for you to hear McSpicy or see it and go like, yeah, it's 11 p.m. I don't quite feel like it right now. Maybe I'll think about it lunch tomorrow. And you go to bed.
Sounds like a different Jeremy.
Yeah.
Who's that among us?
Right. But if you're like, I think I'm not hungry. I don't feel as hungry as I did at 11 p.m. yesterday. Maybe that's a GLP-1 because my hormone's more balanced. But guess what? I just want my McSpicy. And then it comes, and then you take a bite, and maybe you feel full after 2 or 3 bites and satisfied. You take one more bite, you start to feel sick.
Jeremy.
And then you go,
His face is like, I don't think this is the effect I want.
but then you go, well, I've ordered it. I don't want to waste it. I'm going to finish it. Then you're going to feel really not very good thereafter, right? Because that's what the hormone is supposed to do. Okay. If you have a deficiency, the hormone is supposed to kick in and give you that. But if you did not, then it could make you like not only not want to eat McSpicy, you don't want to eat anything. And that's not good, right? Because you run into issues and you break down more muscle, and that's not good.
Yeah.
Muscle is, I think, one of the most important organs for health longevity as well.
I think one interesting aspect that you also kind of touched on is that I think Singapore is a very super age society. I think that's something that is going to become more and more the case, say as well. And muscle loss is something that it's something I
Yes.
can't understand only recently.
Right.
Right. Because I was like, on one end, I was like, wait a moment, I used to be like, if I do weightlifting once a week, I'll gain muscle. And now I'm like, if I do weightlifting once a week, I maintain, but I don't gain any more muscle. And I have to, have weightlifting at least 2 or 3 times a week to even feel like I'm gaining incrementally, right? So I had to do that research, and I only found that statistic that you mentioned of muscle loss kicking in. I mean, I only found out maybe like earlier this year, so not that long ago. But I also feel like a big issue because actually I have elderly relatives of mine who are struggling to walk or even balance themselves. Yeah, it just feels like a really tough issue as well. So I'm just kind of curious how should we be thinking about it? Should we like, I don't know, encouraging them to like we lift or eat more protein? I don't know what's the way. Share.
I think I would say try to use it, otherwise you lose it at any age, right? So if unfortunately you're already, a little bit more frail and or have injuries and you can't weight lift, that's okay. But what movement is safe for you to do, even if it's just, I don't know, little leg lifts, right? Do something. Even with rehab or physiotherapy, use your muscle. Otherwise, you stand to lose it even more. Any bit that you can use and keep is still good. And any way that you can build up more muscle generally is also good. And then when you are younger, start banking down more muscle mass, right? Because of the statistic we just described, because you're going to lose it. Now, generally speaking, again, past 65, while it's not impossible, it gets exponentially harder to build muscle. So a lot of times I tell my patients, just
You
as
got
you're
25 years
investing
right now.
please start investing in building up your muscle that you can draw down on,
Really?
right? As you age.
Yeah, I believe that. So we went to the US in June, and my wife's great uncle is 93. He walks with a cane, but he's an avid fly fisherman. So all of his PT pertains to fishing. So he has like a stick, and then his trainer puts like a elastic band, and to provide resistance on it. And so he's just practicing his casting motion.
Oh,
And that's the thing that motivates him, is that he can still fish.
That's great.
But he's quite old, his mobility's not great, but he still uses his cane and walks around, and then he gets to the side of the river or the ocean, and he sits down, and then he can fish for hours. Yeah, but I was like, this is incredible. He's like, oh, I have to go do PT. It's like, oh, what kind of PT are you doing?
Right.
He's like, oh, it's
This, yes,
casting motion.
exactly. And I think also then the concept of like, when I say use your muscle, there are different ways to use your muscle. If you enjoy weightlifting, great, just do it safely. But then make sure then you don't forget about other muscle groups and neglect them. So it's not just about bulking up and having big muscles. I think personally myself, I started acro yoga a couple of years ago. And I started to literally learn and feel little small muscles in my back that I never appreciated maybe existed, right?
Have you done Pilates?
I have.
That I feel is really good for finding muscles you had no idea existed.
It's somewhat overlapping concepts. You're absolutely right. So, but everyone is wired a bit differently. So, like you said, some people enjoy fishing. So, whatever it is that you enjoy and you can use your muscles, that's great. Let's just do more of that. And then if that means that it could lead to, for example, certain asymmetry. So in the example of fishing, if he's doing it sitting down, he may then not develop sufficient lower limb muscles. If there's an opportunity to correct that imbalance and find other ways to work on that so that it's a bit more balanced. That's also helpful. Also asymmetry between your left and right side, because if there's asymmetry on one side more than the other, then we wonder why we get like,
You'll compensate.
yes, injuries and or wear and tear of the joints more on one side because there's uneven loading.
So much
Yeah.
work.
No, it's
I think we just have to integrate it more. I mean, you see all of those free exercise classes in the parks and stuff. I feel like that's what the government is trying to do.
You know, actually, I realized that I realized I was getting old when I saw a Tai Chi class, and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Because, you know, when you're younger, you see people doing Tai Chi, and you're like,
Oh,
oh, so slow, you know, they're not doing anything. And now you're older, it's like, oh, it sounds quite meditative, and, you know, you hang out people, and, you know, you have breath control.
yes. The breath control, absolutely. Focus, mind, body, coordination. Yeah. It's so funny.
What's your workout, Shian?
I play paddle.
Oh,
So it's like a new sport that I've been trying to learn how to play. So that's like vaguely aerobic, but there's some skill component, coordination, whatever. It's social, right? Because
Yes.
it's a doubles game. So, you know, that's a big driver of
Yes.
longevity.
Yes.
And then I lift. I try to lift twice a week with a trainer.
Yes. That's very good. So it's quite balanced, it sounds like. And actually, racket games have been shown to be one of the best activities or sports for reducing cognitive decline or cognitive impairment and preventing, dementia.
Yeah. But my new idea is actually I'm trying to get my kids to work out more. So my new idea is like trying to do workouts with them.
Wow.
So like, you know, my son likes to play soccer and he's starting to learn tennis. So like trying to build time where like I'm hanging out with them, but we're like playing something together. Because then it's sort of like 2 for 1.
I get it.
Exactly.
So you can hang out then and you pick
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, they enjoy time with you.
And they're not that good, so you run around a lot.
Yeah. Okay, catch the ball.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, not and then like I said, you achieve so many things at the same time, and it also strengthens bonds and relationships, and that's wonderful.
So since you shared yours, maybe I'll share mine, and now hear what's your sports or health routine. For me, it's weightlifting is one, and then I've injured myself a few times doing like 5K and 10K runs. So now I'm switching more into like rucking, which is just walking with a backpack sometimes, just to give me some cardio. So that's my approach. Also because I think I did national service, right? So to me, at least I have some codedness where it's like, hey, doing walks with weight. And I think it's also a nice way to integrate because if you're just running errands or traveling with family, just carrying a backpack that happens to have weight in it.
Yeah.
You kind of have 2 for 1 again, like doing a grocery run, but you just have to carry some weight in it.
I'll just give you a small child. I feel like I'm rucking all the time by carrying a small child who refuses to walk.
I know. But I injured myself once also.
Right.
Yeah, because I carried a kid
Yeah.
and she was squirming.
Oh,
And then I was just,
got it.
and then and it was also winter, so it's a
Right.
bit cold and warm up.
Yeah.
And by the time I had to finish the walk, I was like, oh no, I
Oh no.
Tweaked your back.
I tweaked my ankle, my right
Oh,
ankle.
God.
And I was like, I was out of action for 3 months.
Oh no.
Oh no, it's terrible.
So anyway,
Yeah.
that's why I had to wear
Oh.
was 2 straps, like
Right.
a stable weight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sucks.
Yeah.
How about you? So you're doing like acro yoga? You said?
That's something relatively new that I started on. I used to be a rhythmic gymnast in my teens.
Yeah.
So I think I've always gravitated towards things that involve some form of movement and coordination and if possible music. I enjoy music in the background, but I don't know how to make good music, but I enjoy listening to it, right? So then after I retired from gymnastics in university, I started ballroom dancing. But it's tough to do at a competitive level with work and time scheduling. But some years ago, when we celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary, decided that we would try to get back into it and have a goal to work towards, which is do a dance at our 20th wedding anniversary some years ago. And so we went back to ballroom dancing classes. I find like doing something that involves somebody else, so my husband, keeps me accountable because otherwise sometimes in my busy schedule, if I said, oh, I'm going to go work out here and there, I'm like, yeah, but I got like, 12 more things to do. I've just settle all this, and before I know it, the time's gone. But whereas if I have to actually show up with someone else, then I'm more likely to keep at it. So I think these are little things that we have to also kind of figure out ourselves. Um, I guess also my husband is quite um sporty now, and so from time to time, like, we can't run together because I always feel like I'm slowing him down. But he'll humor me, but I'm like, I really need to move after dinner. They're like, okay, let's go for a run. And I'm like, no, because I'll slow you down. He's like, okay, we can go for a brisk walk. So I think little things like that also. And during the day, um, I try to break up periods of inactivity. So sometimes it's tough if I'm running a really, really packed clinic and it's all back to back to back. But if you're one of my patients, or you've been to our clinic and you see me dashing down the corridor, it's because I'm like, oh, the patient's checking in, and my team knows, yeah, it'll still take another minute. I'm like, all right, then I'll just dash out, run down the corridor, run upstairs to our other unit for a little bit, or go wash my hands and come back. And I think just breaking that little like periods of inactivity, and now like after if I sit too long without moving, I feel really off. So I think that's kind of like building certain signals back in your system. My kids always make fun of me though, because they're pretty serious tennis players. So I'm like the most unfit person in our family. So they're always making fun of me. And when I was with my team once, they said, and my team was like, yeah, your mom runs really fast. They're like, our mom runs? No, she never does anything. And one of my team members whipped out the phone and showed my son a recording of me in high heels sprinting down the corridor at a hospital. And he's like, your mom nearly killed me because she ran in her heels, and I was so worried she was going to knock down people in wheelchairs as she was like dashing around. So I think a lot of things people say, okay, I'm too busy to do this. I'm guilty of the same. But I think if you can find little ways of just incorporating movement, don't even think about exercise, but movement. I love what you said about, your backpack and all. And sometimes, I tell my patients also, like, carry your shopping bags, just make sure they are even loaded, but perhaps as you walk, this is also strength training, right? So I think reframing how we think about movement is useful and can help us clock in what we need even in our everyday
Oh, I've
life.
got one for you, Jeremy. When you make your Nespresso, you can do 20 squats.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I know this because I do this.
You do this?
Yeah.
I have this visual image now.
Well, no, because you're waiting for your coffee to be made. You're like,
perfect.
well, I mean, you could check your phone, or you could just do 20 squats.
Excellent. I'm so proud of you, Xian.
It's fair. I mean,
Yeah.
I just checked my phone.
No, but like, it's like you can do all these like weird things throughout the day when you're like waiting for something to happen.
Yeah, it's true. Oh, if you want to check your phone, Jeremy, while waiting for that Nespresso, you can do a wall sit and check your phone.
A wall sit.
Yeah.
Oh wow, these are getting more and more.
No, they're not. But it's so funny. Our conversations have gravitated around very simple, everyday things. And I thought we were going to talk a lot about tech. So it's quite
That'll be
funny.
our future episode. And on that note, I think that's a good way to tie things up. These are the 3 things that we got from this conversation. First of all, thanks for sharing about how and why you chose to be a doctor in the first place. I thought it was fun to hear about why you chose a profession, but also why you also decided to be a founder in that practice. Secondly, thanks for talking about diabetes, health, and hormones. I think that's something that a lot of people are always thinking about, whether it's the health, the hormones, and so forth. And lastly, thanks for talking about longevity as a practice in terms of the different interventions and approaches as well.
Yeah. Well, it's been great fun. Always a pleasure.
We try to have a good time.
Yeah, it was a good time.
Always.
Okay. On that note, thank you so much for coming.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.